Thousands of people in Egypt rallied once again, this time under the banner of protecting the revolution. But as moderates, Salafists and the Muslim Brotherhood gathered in Cairo's Tahrir Square, are the divisions beginning to show between the groups that were once united behind the revolution? And as the presidential election looms, have the Muslim Brotherhood and the ruling military council misjudged the political landscape? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Now, it wasn't so long ago that it seemed that the Muslim Brotherhood would be the main beneficiary of last year's revolution in Egypt. Indeed, the parliamentary election saw the Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party installed as the most dominant force in the chamber, and the party's voice was growing in influence across the country. But in the months following the elections, the party's been accused of an inconsistent and indecisive political strategy, one that's put it at odds with both the ruling military and the other parties behind the country's revolution. Well, here are some of the major factors that have affected the Brotherhood's fortunes. In March, the group reversed its position on the presidential elections. Initially, it decided it wouldn't field a candidate, and in fact, it expelled Abdul Fattah from the party because he insisted on taking part. But then the Brotherhood decided that it would take part and supported Khairat el-Shatter as its candidate for president. When he was disqualified, it selected another candidate, Mohamed Morsi. Accusations of hypocrisy also followed. Brotherhood demands that the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces amend Article 28 of the Constitution. That clause gives immunity to the Elections Commission. The Brotherhood had previously supported SCAF over the Constitution. And earlier this month, a Cairo court ruled the Muslim Brotherhood's dominance over the committee that would draft a new constitution was unconstitutional. So, is Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood going through a crisis? For more on this, I'm joined by three guests from Cairo. Nader Omran is representative and co-founder of the Freedom and Justice Party, which is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Also in Cairo, Sherif Gaber is an activist and advocate for housing rights. Sharif has been taking part in some of the protests over the course of the last year following the revolution. And in Washington, Abdullah al-Arian is assistant professor of Middle East history at Wayne State University and a scholar specializing in Islamic movements. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed for being with us today. Let me begin in Cairo and with Nader Omran. The Muslim Brotherhood has been coming under some criticism, as we've pointed out, for some of its activities recently. Just speak to some of those accusations and tell us whether you think the Brotherhood is alienating itself from some of the other parts of the revolution.
Yeah, first of all, let's redefine what is revolution and what is Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood is part of the revolution, and part of the revolution powers blocks everywhere, in Tahrir Square and outside Tahrir Square, in Parliament and everywhere. So let's not separate the two definitions.
Well, this is the very point. This is the very point, though, isn't it? Because a lot of the other members, I guess, of the revolution, some of the other political groups and people involved say that's exactly what the Brotherhood has been doing. It's been alienating itself and is no longer part of the original momentum.
That's what they say, but we are not alienating ourselves. Actually, we are going through a course of change here in Egypt. We have one election in parliament, and we are majority in parliament. We are trying to apply our projects. So, and also at the same time, we are taking part in revolutionary activities like march, like last Fridays and the Friday before in Tahrir Square, in order to continue the demands of the revolution. So that's what we are doing. Actually, what the media has been marketing for the past 1 year, that revolution is something, and Muslim Brotherhood has sold the revolution, and now they are just trying to get to power. Of course, this is not true.
All right, Sherif Gaber, let me ask you the same question.
Well, I think, Nader basically said it in attempting to deny it, but the Muslim Brotherhood hasn't been participating in the revolution. I mean, although they might have come up, I mean, they've been the last to show up and the first to leave every time. We've seen them running after seats in the parliament and now the presidential elections, and only coming back out into the streets when they don't get what they want as far as political gains. Meanwhile, we haven't seen them advocating any of the actual demands of the revolution. We haven't seen the Muslim Brotherhood Party even attempting to kind of muster up any attempt to kind of deal with the original revolutionary demands. And I think that their behavior remains and continues to be cynical and opportunistic.
Can you be a bit more specific, though? I mean, just not showing up in large enough numbers to Tahrir Square
It's not simply a question of not showing up, I think. I mean, not showing up has been a big part of it, especially when there have been moments where the majority of the kind of revolutionary forces and even the majority of people on the streets have felt a need to return to the square. The Muslim Brotherhood has refused because it has been playing up to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces for months now. And now that that relationship seems to be a little less stable and that the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is going back maybe on their agreements with the Brotherhood is now coming out against them as if this is a new thing and as if they're spearheading some sort of radical demand, where we've been in the streets chanting against the military rule for months now. We've been attacked by police and army for doing so. We have been imprisoned, and the Muslim Brotherhood has been getting by very easily and, you know, worrying about elections only. And to say that they have been a part of the revolution this entire time, I think, is an absolute travesty.
Well, let's get to Washington, D.C. Abdullah, al-Arian. I mean, from outside of Cairo, are you looking at this as just an argument over semantics and minor issues, or is there a serious problem going on here?
Well, I think there is certainly a deep kind of misunderstanding between what the intentions behind the original revolution was and what the behavior has been from the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And we've seen this, I think, as being a product of a process that's really been at work for several decades. We've seen the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, at a certain point in its time kind of espouse a certain revolutionary ideology, but I think over time the trend has been to try and seek more accommodation with the regime. And we've seen that from the 1980s kind of going forward, especially in its growing relationship with the Mubarak regime as kind of the chief sort of semi-accepted opposition. And I think it's kind of interesting now that we're seeing that as more people have kind of celebrated the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood was no longer a revolutionary force in Egypt and it was far more willing to be accommodationist with the regime and more of a reform-minded organization, that now it's being called back to act within the kind of realm of the revolution. And of course, that's not something that's an easy transition to make. And so I think that's kind of where we see the hesitation, at least in the initial stages of the protests of January of 2011, in terms of its involvement and participation, especially at the leadership level. And then over time, it's been trying to kind of toe this line. And so we've seen kind of two different faces. One that does seek to engage with the revolutionaries in the street, and we've seen that happen during the days in which they were seeking the overthrow of the Mubarak regime. And then we've also seen another face that's trying as much as possible to find a more reform-minded transition that does not seek to completely overturn the previous system, because it's one, of course, that the Muslim Brotherhood has sought benefits and gained some benefits from as well.
Well, let's get back to Nader then in Cairo. I mean, those are the accusations, and it seems as if people are fairly convinced that there are questions to be answered.
Actually, we've been saying for the past 1 year about this, and I think it's a repetition of each and every accusations like this, that we have a deal, and also time proves that we don't have any deals with the SCAF, and we hadn't had any kind of deals with the previous regime. But if somebody insists on this, so we cannot judge the intention, so we cannot just defend this because we are not defendants. But let me say one thing very clear. What people were asking the Muslim Brotherhood, or what been asking for the past year, let me make it global, more global thinking. The people who are asking Muslim Brotherhood like to be like the big brother, okay? So, but they want the big brother in just the duties, not the rights. So we don't have any rights, so we have the duties. When they say you come down to the Tahrir Square, we have to come down. If we don't, so you are just betraying the revolution, and vice versa. If they say we don't want to go there and we go something, it's just the opposite way. And if we don't just comply with their people, with any revolutionary power demand, we are said to be betraying the revolution. So it's been repeating over and over again. So I think time proves that we have maybe very further and deep look at the situation. Maybe some people take time, they are still new, but we have much more experience with dealing with political troubles.
Well, I mean, you may not accept the criticisms made by our other two guests. What about then the latest survey that I've just come across, the al-Arian Center for Political and Strategic Studies, which says that 45% of the people who voted for your party in the parliamentary elections say they won't do it again. I mean, surely you have more of a problem than you're admitting to.
Of course, first of all, let's not agree with one of the papers which said yesterday or the day before that there's some problems with Dr. Morsi's campaign in Delta, but actually there was no problem at that time for people just showing photos of people who are injured or something. Still, al-Arian newspaper is some of the remaining pillars of Mubarak's regime. This is one thing. And second thing is, okay, if the 45% were not going to vote for us, so we accept democracy. We are tolerant to democracy. The point is, some people are not tolerant when we win. They don't like it. So that's the point then.
Sharif, is it at this point in your interests to actually come out against the Muslim Brotherhood? I mean, does it not make more sense for other members of the revolutionary movement to welcome back the Brotherhood and say, okay, we may have our disagreements, but the only way to actually cement the revolution long term is for these parties to join together?
I don't know if that's actually the case, because when you look at some of the actual demands of the revolution, they've all been related to social justice, serious radical reform of the economy and the way in which Egypt does business, both externally and internally. It's been a question of police reform that needs to be immediate and severe, and we've heard nothing of the Brotherhood about, or from the Brotherhood, of any of these types of demands. I mean, the question is do they even have the political will or desire to push forward some of the more radical and I think some of the more important and serious demands of the revolution that are not just something that are talked about between activists, but are something that ordinary people in the street are concerned about. I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of different neighborhoods, including very poor neighborhoods, that thought that the Muslim Brotherhood was going to be helping them with these things upon getting elected, but they've actually been the most disappointed from what I've heard. I mean, the question is that the revolution had a set of demands, and the Brotherhood, though they may be coming out and saying that now they're against the military council, which yes is an important demand of the revolution as it continues, is not even the beginning of the kind of deep and structural change that we're talking about when we say revolution.
Okay, but
they're still playing a game of reform and politics, as exactly, you know, evidenced by the kind of talk about experience and long kind of histories within politics.
Okay,
that's exactly what we don't want.
But my question to you is, these set of demands that you say the revolution encompasses, how are these going to be achieved if the Muslim Brotherhood is not on board? I mean, can you see a route towards achieving the demands as you see them without the cooperation of the Brotherhood?
I think that there are more than enough people who are independent and who are not affiliated with the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood represents now a strong force within Parliament and within the kind of formal set of institutional politics that we have largely still inherited from the Mubarak era. But I think that you're seeing new forms of political organization, new forms of affiliation and association that will carry out these demands with or without the Brotherhood. We have for a long time been of the mind that at the point at which the Brotherhood will work along these same demands, we have no problem. It's not a question of personalities to us. It is a question really of making improvements in the lives of ordinary Egyptians. That's what this revolution came about to do, and that's what we've seen none of, and we haven't even seen lip service paid to this.
Abdullah, let me put the same question to you then. Can you see a path towards the achieving of some of the demands that Sharif has just been laying out there under the current circumstances, or is this lead up and post-presidential election period just going to see more chaos?
Well, I think you certainly can't exclude the Muslim Brotherhood from the revolutionary process. I think given not only their access to kind of the institutional structures that they have now, including the elections in the parliament, but even its social networks and the institutions that they've had within society for many decades are absolutely critical to any real improvements kind of in the lives of Egyptians. And I think on the question of the parliament, I think it is far too early to judge the parliament, because it's certainly not a parliament at this point that can be seen as being able to actually create policy. This is a parliament that doesn't have even the power to install its own ministers, to form its own government. And I think the real question is what is going to be done with the military rulers. And I think that's the confrontation we're witnessing now. And I think as we kind of stand and watch the situation as it's playing out on the ground, we're seeing that the Muslim Brotherhood is finally coming around to the very uncomfortable fact, I think uncomfortable from its standpoint, that the military is really what's been holding all the cards for this entire time, something that they've attempted to avoid, at least in the interest perhaps of political expediency for some time. But now it's finally coming to the same conclusion that most of the activists in Tahrir Square and elsewhere have all come to that conclusion from day one of Mubarak's resignation. Now we're at least seeing that the Muslim Brotherhood is coming to that same conclusion, and hopefully there can be some unified approach that allows to at least find all of these political forces coming together to really confront the fact that's facing Egypt now, which is that there hasn't been much change since the military council has taken over.
But that's essentially the point I'm putting to you, and the question I'm asking you is, are we going to see a situation in which, because of the conflict we're seeing between our other guests, we will see the military continuing to hold the cards, and therefore no real progress in revolutionary terms in Egypt at all if the military is not finally removed from its position?
Well, I think that unity is still possible, and we've seen some discussions between...
Sorry, Abdullah, just carry on with that for a second.
Yeah. So I think that the unity is possible, but I think there has to be some measure of good faith on the part of the Muslim Brotherhood. We haven't seen that yet in terms of its real commitment to the principles of the revolution. I think that, for instance, they have to be far more inclusive. I think because they have achieved so much independently of these other forces for so long, that they haven't needed to try and create a more unified approach. And we've seen that for the past year. I think now is really the time to kind of put aside the kind of more immediate and personal gains for the organization and to try to actually include more of the other actors into the process. But this means that they have to take real measures. And we've seen, for instance, the reaction to their fielding of a presidential candidate, something they had pledged not to do so that they would not be in a position in which they would maintain all of the major political institutions in their own control. And so now I think is a time in which they have to seek some broader coalition with some of the other movements.
Well, let me put that too, Nader. Do you think you need to seek broader coalition? Because thus far you seem to suggest there isn't even a problem, so you might not think that there is a necessity.
Of course, there is a necessity to have a coalition, but before having this coalition, we have a real problem, which answers, I have information that which answers both questions of parliament and presidential elections, why we named a presidential candidate. Actually, what's been happening in the parliament before for the past 4 or 5 months is that we could not find any channel or any vehicle to apply our projects, that we founded a parliament without any mandate. So that's why we went to the better option of going to the presidential elections. Actually, we could not even sack the government. We cannot even have our own coalition government. So that's something which is prior to the having coalition or something, or trying to find a compromise, that we cannot even form a government. So how can we have our project being applied on the ground? So that's why we named the presidential election candidate.
Sharif, does that make sense to you?
I mean, but the thing is that everyone knew that this parliament was powerless, or was going to be powerless, from long before the elections, and that it was simply a legitimate face for the military council to say that they were undergoing democratic transition. So if that was the case, why was the Brotherhood so eager to tamp down on the street politics and actively oppose the street politics movement at the time in order to rush into this parliament that we all knew had, no powers and no mandate? I mean, and now the same thing with the presidency under military rule. What makes them think that they're so sure? And also, if it's simply a question of authorizing their program, I mean, then I have very little faith that I even want to see them being able to take the presidency in the parliament to do so, because we have very little idea of what their program is, and what indications we've had have shown it to be many of the same pro-business sort of neoliberal policies that the Mubarak regime espoused, just under a kind of more Islamist or moderate kind of Islamist banner.
Is that the case, Nader?
Of course not. I think we have this Nahda project, which is called the Renaissance Project. This project has been started and been brought up by Muslim Brotherhood for 1 month now, and it's been there for 20 months. It's fruits of working all together with some other experts from all other parties of this country for around 20 years. So we have our own project. If you go to internet, you can read it, and it's been also, it has a patent.
Well, I mean, the fact that it seems that your message isn't getting across is surely a problem then, isn't it?
No, I don't think. I mean, on the popular level, we have our message getting across. It's been there. But if you just judge the media outlets, so of course the media outlets is really still corrupt. So we are just depending on the popular.
Well, we're not
base,
talking about
actually.
the media outlets here. We have a guest in our studio who is very articulately voicing what the criticisms are. Let me come to Abdullah, though. Do you agree that the message on the streets of the Muslim Brotherhood is getting out? Do you think that there is nothing for the Brotherhood to be worried about here?
No, I think that the Muslim Brotherhood has its own core base of support, and I think we've seen that. It's kind of in the number, you know, no one knows the exact range of citizens, but it's probably in the neighborhood of a few million people that can be counted on to support the organization through thick and thin. I think the real question is how they've been able to appeal to the broader Egyptian society, and we've certainly seen some success with that. We've seen it with the referendum in March of 2011. We've seen it with the parliamentary elections in late last year. The question is, can we see it be expanded broadly enough to support a presidential candidate? And I think there are certainly a lot of question marks about that. And can we see it on a consistent basis at a time when there really is not a very well-articulated platform, especially on the issues of social justice and economic justice, in which I think all of the parties are kind of guilty of really putting forward kind of more generic slogans as opposed to a real platform of policies, because I think the real critical issue facing the country has been the constitutional crisis and the ability to actually formulate the rules of the next political system that all Egyptians will have to be partaking in.
But very quickly, Sharif, back to you. I just want to go back to one of my earlier points. Are we not in a danger here of missing the forest for the trees? While we're picking on individual elements of the political system here, what we're facing really is a presidential election which is vital to the future of the country, in which at the moment it looks like either the ruling military are going to maintain power through one way or another, or you're going to end up with a series of other parties squabbling amongst themselves and not really making any progress. Isn't that worse than the current situation?
I mean, I would argue that this presidential election isn't necessarily vital. I mean, the vital issue is, as you said, the military council, and that has been our primary issue and our primary opponent.
But the president holds an awful lot of power
streets.
within the existing constitution, and the parliament doesn't, as I think all three of you sort of agree to a greater or lesser extent.
This is exactly the problem, though. If we go at it as if this is a kind of simple reformist movement where we took down Mubarak and we're willing to play by the same constitution, I mean, we will always push for more. I mean, the thing is that we are maybe stuck because of what the military has done and because of the eagerness of political parties to re-enter into parliament and presidential elections. We are perhaps stuck with having to have these elections, but at the same time, in advocating for our demands, in talking about what the heart of the revolution is, we should never limit it to these series of elections. We're very cognizant of the effect
So then again, let me ask you, how does one
achieve
achieve your demands?
How does one achieve our demands? I think it's through a continuation of pressure on whichever government comes to power to make sure that they are either following some of the initial and very clearly set out demands of the revolution when people went out during the 18 days, or through the building of alternative campaigns, alternative committees. The popular committees that have been working on Cairo and other Egyptian city streets now have been making some of the largest difference that I've seen in post-revolutionary Egypt, and this is just ordinary people improving their neighborhoods, improving their lives. So I think that our goal is to continue building these sort of radicalized, these political, these revolutionary communities and these revolutionary groups who will demand the revolution regardless of who sits in power and what their powers are. Because Nader, it is a question of everyday life.
We're running out of time, but Nader, let me put it to you. Are you at all worried that this presidential election will see the military some way or another maintaining its grip on power?
If in the sense of being fair elections, no, I don't think so. I think it's going to be fair elections, hopefully. But if you're talking about the situation of the SCAF afterwards, yeah, we hope it's not going to be something different. But I'm so skeptic about the situation of the SCAF, and this also should be supported by the constitution as well.
Okay, final word very quickly to Abdullah. Are you thinking that some of the revolutionary demands as outlined by Sharif there are achievable?
Absolutely. I think they are certainly achievable. I think there has to be, however, again, more coordination between the youth activists and the people who are actually going to be in a position to implement these changes. And I think that's a question of accountability. The Muslim Brotherhood is for the first time, I think, beginning to acknowledge the fact that they are going to be accountable to the broader segment of Egyptian society than they have been in the past. And I think this could only bode well, I think, for the future of Egypt and the revolution.
All right, there we will have to leave it. Thank you indeed to all of my guests today. In Cairo, we had Nader Omran. Also in Cairo, Sherif Gaber. And in Washington, D.C., Abdullah al-Arian. Thank you all. And thank you all very much for watching this edition of Inside Story. If you can, do send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. For the meantime, thanks for watching and goodbye for now.